Okay, hold up a second. I'm sure we all know what Star Wars is, because unless you've been living in carbonite for 50 years, you'd probably know of this absolute worldwide phenomenon, and for good reason too. Star Wars is huge. With the epic lightsaber fights, timeless visual effects, and gripping soundtrack, it's no surprise that Star Wars is one of the most profitable franchises in the entire world. So to celebrate the cultural sensation which is Star Wars, I thought it would be a fun and great idea to rewatch every single Star Wars movie and rank all of them in a tier list, which is of my own opinion, by the way. Don't know how much I gotta say that. Now, for all the people out there who also want to rewatch Star Wars, there's two main ways to watch these movies. You could go the chronological route and start at episode 1 and end at episode 9 with Rogue One and Solo in between. Or you could go with the Chad order of release route, where you watch the movies in the same order they come out, which is how most Star Wars fans experience these movies. I decided to choose the latter of these two options, so for all you Star Wars nerds out there, please do not burn me alive in the comment section. Anyways, without further ado, put on your Jedi robes, and come with me, young Padawans, as we take a trip through the galaxy, and may the Force be with you. Star Wars A New Hope. Ah yes, the very first and original Star Wars movie from all the way back in 1977. I've got to say that watching this felt like witnessing a piece of movie history, man. This movie is so old yet still looks so good even by today's standards. All the practical elements really stood the test of time here, considering once again that this was all made nearly 50 years ago. Anyways, the movie starts with a rebel ship being inducted by a Star Destroyer and Princess Leia being captured by Darth Vader. Then C-3PO and R2-D2 escape with the plans and crash land on Tatooine, eventually being bought out by the Luke Skywalker. The next day, Luke gets absolutely beaten by a bunch of sand people, and this is when we meet the one and only Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, Ben Kenobi. And with some swift convincing, Luke joins Ben to try and take down the Empire. So they travel to Mos Eisley Cantina and hire Han Solo and his walking carpet Chewbacca. And aboard the Millennium Falcon, they go to Alderaan. Never mind. So instead, the gang gets captured by the Death Star. Luke and Han rescue Leia. We don't talk about this. And Ben Kenobi sacrifices himself and dies to Vader in a goofy lightsaber fight. Then the rebels come back and literally just blow up the entire Death Star because why not? So yeah, for the very first Star Wars movie ever, it's pretty damn good. Sure, the story isn't that refined yet and the first act started pretty slow, but at the time, this was all pretty unheard of in 1977 and was actually really revolutionary. George Lucas kinda went crazy with these visual effects. So to give this movie credit for starting an entire franchise, it's going S tier, no questions asked. But first, I wake up at precisely 4 AM every morning. I bathe in ice-cold water and eat a balanced, healthy breakfast. After I get ready, I open my browser of choice, Opera, the greatest browser of all time. To me, browsing is not just surfing the internet aimlessly hoping to kill the time. It's an art form. I can open as many tabs as I want and graze through them using tab islands. Browsing online has never been more productive. And with its built-in VPN and ad blocker, my data is safe with Opera. Leaving me to browse and watch my regularly scheduled programming in privacy. I open the Opera sidebar with anticipation, and I open the Arya AI, asking it questions and getting real-time information in the blink of an eye. Then I quickly navigate to the music player and immerse myself in music and podcasts. There is an idea of my search history and my activity online, but it is something completely illusory. And though I can be online in multiple tabs at once, and my data appears to be shared and collected, I simply am not there. So get Opera browser today through the link in the description for the low price of absolutely free. Back to the video. The Empire Strikes Back is great. This movie might possibly even be, dare I say, the peak of Star Wars. It's alright, prequels. I still love you though. Empire was such a compelling sequel to the first Star Wars movie and further introduced and developed all of these characters. This movie practically carries the entire main trilogy the same way Revenge of the Sith carried the prequels. So this movie starts on the ice planet of Hoth, where Luke gets captured by a Wampa, manages to escape, and then against his will gets stuffed inside the stomach of a Tauntaun. Honestly, not the best start to any Star Wars movie, but it gets better. Luke then meets the Force Ghost of Obi-Wan, pretty much telling him to find Master Yoda for his Jedi training. This is where we all meet Yoda in his swamp for the first time and we witness the greatest duel in Star Wars history. Yoda versus R2-D2. Anyways, the rest of the gang head to Cloud City to meet some guy called Lando Calrissian and hide out from the Emperor. But guess what?
It's a trap!
Man, this has got to be the worst family gathering I've ever seen.
I love you.
I know.
He's an asshole.
Han Solo also gets frozen in carbonite because, why not, I guess? Luke then shows up pretty late to the party and duels Darth Vader, which unsurprisingly goes horribly wrong.
He told me you killed him. No. I am your father. The fuck do you mean, no?
Man, this scene where Vader gives his grand reveal to Luke is still so good till this day. I can only imagine how mortified the audience was back in 1980 watching this scene. So yeah, after Luke finds out that Vader was his father, he pretty much commits attempted suicide but then gets saved by the Falcon. So yeah, The Empire Strikes Back is all around a great movie, and in my opinion is definitely the strongest of the original trilogy. This is also probably no surprise. I mean, not to mention that this film wasn't even directed by Lucas and it looks gorgeous, man. Kirshner definitely one-upped everything A New Hope had to offer in this movie. This film gave us great characters, memorable moments, and if you really think about it, also started the wave of Star Wars sequels and other movies. So therefore, it's only fitting that this movie gets S tier. Listen, alright, I don't mean to say that Return of the Jedi is a bad film by all means, but what I am saying is that this might be the weakest film of the original trilogy by a tiny amount. I know a lot of people still definitely love this movie, and I do too by all means, but episode 4 and 5 just outright beat this movie tenfold, man. So Return of the Jedi starts out strong with Leia unfreezing Han from Carbonite, who now belongs to one Jabba the Hutt, but then she gets caught and enslaved in a space bikini.
There's no underwear in space.
But then Luke shows up and saves the whole gang. Also, Boba Fett falls and dies in the Sarlacc pit. At least I think. After this, the story continues with Luke going to visit Yoda and him basically confirming that Darth Vader was indeed his father and then dying shortly after.
Your father is. Oh my gosh, Dad, Vader.
So then the gang go to this moon called Endor, populated by sentient teddy bears, who then just mistakes C-3PO as a god for some reason. And after some fighting, Luke just surrenders himself to Darth Vader to try and convince him to turn back to the light side. This doesn't really work on Vader, so he brings Luke to Palpatine, who starts torturing him with Force lightning. This is when Vader really comes to his senses and decides to finally turn to the light, throwing Palpatine off of a ledge and killing him. For any of you wondering, yes, Palpatine is indeed dead, do not look further into it. Then Vader dies and Luke's arms, finally fulfilling his redemption arc. Death Star blows up and the movie ends. Honestly, while Return of the Jedi was still a great ending to the original trilogy, I feel like out of all the movies, it was kind of the worst. The first act dragged on for way too long, and all of the scenes in Endor kind of felt really unnecessary since Luke was just gonna surrender himself anyway. This movie just had a lot of weird filler that I feel like could have been avoided, and the final act is really the only thing that ties it all together for me. So this might be a bit controversial, but that's an A tier for me. Ladies and Jedis, we've officially made it to the prequel era of Star Wars. Thank God for the prequels, man. Anyways, the Phantom Menace kind of sucked. Coming from watching Return of the Jedi, this one was a huge downgrade in literally every way aside from the final duel, but I'll get back to that. So the Phantom Menace starts out with its usual title crawl, indicating that there are taxation systems in dispute? Taxes! So Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn are sent to some spaceship to try and fix it, but then get ratted out as Jedi Knights, making them flee the scene. And my god, I gotta tell you that rewatching this movie, I did not understand a single thing in this opening scene. I have no idea if it's the dry-ass plot we have to follow or the dialogue that these characters were speaking, but none of these were connecting with me. I only ever remember this opening scene as the very first level in the original LEGO Star Wars game and nothing more than that. Anyway, so the next scene is where Qui-Gon Jinn is in who knows where doing who knows what, and he meets Jar Jar Binks, who's this weird Jamaican sounding comic relief alien guy. Surprisingly, after having watched this movie all my life, it's only up until now that I realized, hold on a second, is Jar Jar a racist stereotype? Anyway, so their ship engine breaks, which leads the entire gang to Tatooine where they meet young Anakin Skywalker. Man, this must have been an unfortunate planet for him to have grown up on. Qui-Gon senses that Anakin is indeed the chosen one, and he bets his entire ship and Anakin's freedom on a pod race, which he wins, confirming Anakin is the chosen one. Anyways, I'm gonna do a bit of fast forwarding here because all this stuff's pretty boring. After the war is waged between the battle droids and the Jar Jar Binks people, Maul confronts Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and this is when we get one of the greatest lightsaber fights in the entire series. Guys, allow me to just glaze this fight scene for a minute. Imagine watching this movie coming out of seeing Return of the Jedi and seeing Maul open with not one, but 2 lightsabers. Not to mention the choreography was a massive step up from the original trilogy. And the soundtrack, man. John Williams carried this movie so hard. Anyways, I'm sure you guys all know what happens next. Qui-Gon dies, Obi-Wan force jumps and slices Maul, and then Obi-Wan vows to train Anakin. The end. Honestly, this movie was way worse than I remember it being. The plot was quite incoherent, the characters were a lot more boring than I remember, and out of all of the prequels, this is probably the worst one. D tier. Attack of the Clones was ever so slightly an improvement to the Phantom Menace. It's only after I rewatched these prequel movies that it actually hits me like, wait a second. These movies are actually not as well written as I thought. Let's start off with a jumbled and confusing plot. So the first act of this movie centers around Padme going around building an army for a separatist movement of sorts. I honest to God had no idea had I not looked this stuff up on Wikipedia. But this is the apparent reason as to why Palpatine keeps trying to assassinate Padme. But the problem here lies with, if Palpatine had succeeded in killing Padme in the first place, then would Anakin have ever actually turned to the dark side? This writing just makes absolutely no sense, man. I'm sorry, Lucas. So whilst Obi-Wan and Anakin are tasked to protect Padme, Anakin reveals that he had been in love with Padme for a very long time. And then Padme almost gets assassinated again by some bounty hunter. At this point, Anakin and Obi-Wan split ways, with Obi-Wan tracking down Jango Fett as the bounty hunter whilst also discovering the clone army, and Anakin and Padme having a half-assed love story with the greatest dialogue I've ever seen.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Unspoken Riz right here, man.
After that whole debacle, Anakin has nightmares of his mother. So then he goes back to Tatooine to save her, but then she dies. And so he goes on a murderous rampage, killing not just the men, but the women. And the children too. I won't even lie, this was a pretty emotional turning point in the story, and it was mostly executed pretty well. Moving forward, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme all get captured on this other planet where the bad guys were hiding out, led by Count Dooku. But then the Jedi arrive and resolve the issues with peace. Obi-Wan and Anakin then face off against Count Dooku before getting utterly destroyed, leading to him escaping. Anakin marries Padme, and the end. All in all, Attack of the Clones was a movie dragged down by a confusing plot, inconsistent writing, and most of all, hellish looking CGI. Like, Jesus Christ, man, the CGI in this movie is unbelievable. At points, it straight up looks like a PS3 game. While I will applaud this movie for focusing more on developing Anakin's story, I feel like it was just kind of an afterthought, and George Lucas just rushed all the important stuff in Revenge of the Sith. There are genuinely not a lot of redeeming or memorable scenes that are from this movie either. Rewatching this movie was pretty nostalgic and all, but also it kind of ruined it for me, and that makes me a bit sad. At least it could have been worse. C tier. Revenge of the Sith is a movie with a tragic yet well-made story buried under bloated scenes. There, I said it. Listen, I absolutely adored this movie, but it still has its flaws. Let's start off with the plot. This movie starts and dives straight into the action with Obi-Wan and Anakin saving Palpatine from CGI hell. And then we get this classic scene where Palpatine convinces Anakin to kill Count Dooku, like, do it, Anakin. The next few scenes of this movie are basically Anakin having nightmares of Padme dying. And to top it all off, the Jedi Council don't even grant my mans the rank of Master because, oh, I don't know, they just didn't feel like it. Like, the dude is literally the chosen one, and the Jedi actively spit in his face and don't even value him. This all works in Palpatine's favor, who, if you didn't already know, is indeed a Sith Lord. Palpatine then goes on to tell Anakin the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, the evil Sith Lord who was killed by his apprentice, who, by the way, was Palpatine this whole time, according to lore. And Palpatine basically manipulates Anakin, saying the dark side can save Padme and even create life. Hey, wait a second. Is Palpatine Anakin's father? Anyway, so the Jedi eventually deduce that Palpatine was an evil Sith Lord and arrest him in the most hypocritical Jedi way possible, until Palpatine brutally slaughters 3 of the Jedi for lore reasons, and then Anakin walks in and sees Mace Windu threatening Palpatine, making him look like the bad guy. And of course, Anakin chooses to save Padme, so he fully embraces the dark side and helps Palpatine kill Mace. After this whole fight is when we get possibly one of the best sequences in Star Wars. Order 66. Oh man, all those Jedi never saw it coming, huh? For the few that don't know, Order 66 is basically a command that causes all clones to straight up just unalive every single Jedi no matter the cost. The scene showing this is actually done so well, and it's just so sad yet oddly satisfying to see the Jedi fall like this. Man, those younglings never get old, am I right? So after arriving on the lava planet Coruscant, Padme tries to plead with Anakin, who is evil now by the way, and makes Padme choke on her aspirations. But then Obi-Wan shows up and the two settle their differences ends with the greatest lightsaber battle ever. Man, not only does this lightsaber battle have the best choreography in the whole of Star Wars, it's got some of the best soundtrack too. Praise be John Williams. And so after a total of 9 minutes, Obi-Wan eventually slices and dices Anakin with his high ground assist, before Palpatine shows up in the end and puts him in his classic Vader suit. Also, Padme dies whilst giving birth to Luke and Leia, and just like that, Star Wars has come full circle. Now obviously, this is one of the best Star Wars movies in my opinion. Just remove the first half of it and it is so perfect, man. I just love this movie because of how rich it is in the story and how it accomplishes what the prequels were supposed to accomplish in the first place. That being to tell the Shakespearean tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. This is still a very integral movie for Star Wars as a whole. It's very dark, very violent, and also completes the saga. Yep, there are totally no other Star Wars movies. This is the last one. Overall, was Revenge of the Sith a good movie? Well, kinda, but was it a good Star Wars movie? Yes. S tier. Well, we've made it to Disney territory. Honestly, I would have been very content with ending the video here. I mean, 6 Star Wars movies are already hard enough to review on their own. But alas, the bullshit continues. The Disney trilogy sucks balls. The sky is blue. This is both common knowledge. At least we get to start off with the best movie of the trilogy and then slowly descend further into madness. So first off is The Force Awakens. Honestly, this movie is actually not as bad on the outside, because after comparing this movie to The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, this movie actually looks decent. So this movie starts off with unanswered questions leading to more unanswered questions. The First Order is back, there's a new emo Sith on the block, and Luke Skywalker is missing. Also, there's a mysterious bloke called Snoke. We first get introduced to the stormtrooper guy called Finn, who basically goes rogue and tries to escape the First Order along with a pilot called Poe Dameron. There's also this random sand woman called Rey who owns an orange droid called BB-8, who apparently carries the map to Luke Skywalker. Finn meets Rey on Tatooine and then they get chased before eventually escaping in the Millennium Falcon. I'm not even gonna lie, seeing this scene made me realize how much I've missed the Falcon, man. And if that Falcon isn't nostalgic enough, we get the Han Solo and Chewbacca. This Soul moment was so insane for everyone back in 2015. When I saw this scene in the theaters, I remember everyone clapping when Han Solo appeared, man. Unfortunately, it is revealed that Han Solo kinda just went back to being a broke degenerate smuggler, which sort of just threw all of his character development out the door. We've also got
Systems will bow to the First Order!
holy shit, Space Hitler. Anyway, so Rey somehow retrieves the Youngling Slayer 9000 but gets captured as the First Order search for BB-8. But then Rey just escapes using Jedi mind tricks because she's also the chosen one, I guess. Then the Resistance arrives in the Death Star base thingy and Han confronts Kylo Ren, who is also his son, by the way. And Kylo Ren just kills him. Man, these father-son reunions never end well in these movies. After this scene is when we get the final showdown between Kylo Ren and Finn, who gets absolutely destroyed within seconds. But then Rey shows up, uses the Force, and now it's her time to duel Kylo. And Kylo Ren, the absolute unit, who was a Jedi turned warlord, trained since birth by the Luke Skywalker, somehow sells this fight. I have no words. So yeah, this movie ends on a cliffhanger with Rey finding Luke and giving him his father's lightsaber. The end. Honestly, The Force Awakens was actually not that bad in my opinion. It had a ton of wasted potential, but at the end of the day, this movie did its job with setting up the next 2 movies in the trilogy. Sure, the writing was a bit off and mysterious at times, and this movie did just copy all of its major plot points from A New Hope, but I still enjoyed it. E tier. Rogue One was actually kind of a good movie. This is the only Star Wars movie that actually manages to take itself seriously and has a completely different vibe from all the others. Whereas most Star Wars movies revolve around the funny lightsaber fights, this one revolves around the many horrors of being in a war. And it just made this movie feel much more historical. Yeah, this movie's pretty dark, man. Literally every single character just straight up dies in the end. So this movie starts on this planet where this guy called the Director recruits this retired guy to build him a Death Star at gunpoint. And when he refuses, he kills his wife, leading his daughter, Jyn Erso, to hide out and eventually get rescued by the rebels. After 15 years, Jyn's father reveals that he created a flaw in the Death Star so massive that one explosive reaction fired into it is enough to destroy the whole thing. And I gotta admit, this was a really clever way of explaining how the Death Star was destroyed so easily in A New Hope. So then the director finds out that Jyn's dad were sending transmissions to the rebels. So he basically kills his entire team of engineers before the rebels attack, killing him in the explosion. We then get this hilarious scene of the director meeting with Darth Vader himself to try to explain why the base was attacked. This of course ends with the greatest line spoken in Star Wars history.
Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, Director.
So now with the hope of stealing the Death Star plant in order to find the weak spot, Jin leads the Suicide Squad back into Scarif. We've got the blind guy from John Wick 4, this robot guy, this guy I don't know the name of, this guy who I also don't know the name of, and Cassian from Andor. Yeah, this movie honestly did not give us enough time to get to know any of these main characters. As soon as the rebels land, they have this massive war, and I will admit, it's really cool. Just the way the Empire is portrayed in this movie makes them look so grand compared to the rebels, and it honestly just all makes for a really good final battle. And since this movie sequel came out about 47 years ago, they didn't really need any of these extra characters. So they just killed each one of them off one by one. And if only they had actually developed these guys a bit further, I might have cared, but it's still pretty cool nonetheless. The ending is pretty top notch too, with the rebels eventually getting the Death Star plans through, but then having Scarif blown up by the Death Star. And we get this really emotional moment with Jin and Cassian just staring off into their inevitable death. Also the absolute god tier ending after this with Darth Vader. You just can't help but appreciate this scene even if it's fan service. Vader's just absolutely slaughtering these poor rebels. So yeah, I definitely recommend watching Rogue One, even if all the good stuff's all the way at the end. It's basically just a regular Star Wars movie, but without the Jedi and much more mature. And although this movie had a lackluster start, it more than made up for it in the last act. Disney, please make more spin-offs like this. B tier. The Last Jedi. Ooh, this might just be the most controversial movie in all of Star Wars. I mean, when this came out, it completely split the fan base, and while I'll admit there are some commendable things from this movie, it's still the biggest piece of dog shit. Let's dive into the plot. So this movie picks up where we left off from The Force Awakens, with the rebels and the First Order still at war with each other. This is when you first start to realize that the writing in this movie has taken a liking to using quite possibly the worst jokes with the worst comedic timing in all of Star Wars.
I believe he's tooling with you, sir.
About his mother.
Also, Finn has surprisingly sustained no injuries after being literally sliced open in The Force Awakens. Man, Disney really nerfed these lightsabers hard, huh? Fast forward a bit and we're back to Rey handing Luke his father's lightsaber, which Luke then responds to by throwing the lightsaber like it was nothing.
A Jedi's weapon deserves more respect.
Yeah, somehow this integral cliffhanger from the last movie has now been turned into a Family Guy funny moment for the sake of subverting expectations. This is the most out of character thing I've seen anybody in Star Wars do, and keep in mind we are only 15 minutes into the movie. Luke then refuses to help Rey and the Resistance as he's sort of just given up on the ideas of Jedi as a whole, but he eventually gets convinced to help Rey through the power of nostalgia. Also side tangent, but what the hell is this absolute joke of a scene where Leia just dies but then doesn't actually die and instead just floats through space? Just why? You guys could have just, you know, done a proper send-off to Carrie Fisher? Nope. Alright, more Force bullshit, why don't we? Luke eventually reveals to Rey that he felt evil in Kylo, who was once his student, and almost killed him but hesitated, causing Kylo to misinterpret the scene and in turn burn down his entire Jedi temple. Wow, that is quite dark. Honestly, I really like the ideas in this scene, as it made for a pretty good backstory. This scene would have also answered a lot of questions we had in episode 7, but unfortunately, this is basically like the only good scene I like from this movie. We also have the side plot in this movie, which revolves around Finn and this girl named Rose, which is also completely unnecessary for the plot, which is very sad because Finn's role in this movie was just wasted when compared to The Force Awakens. So anyways, plot happens and Rey just voluntarily surrenders to Kylo Ren, trying to turn him into the light side like how Luke did in episode 6. This leads to Kylo Ren killing Snoke, but then refusing to actually join the light side. This gets interrupted when the rebel leader Holdo just decides to lightspeed ram and destroy everything.
This is millions to one!
I mean, this scene makes zero sense, but at least it looks pretty cool, right? So with most of the rebels just being dead, the remaining rebels make it to the planet of Crate, where they all make their last stand with the First Order. But then Luke Skywalker somehow appears and stalls for the rebels to all escape. Kylo comes down and fights Luke in saber combat, but it's revealed that this was all just a Force projection and the real Luke was never there in the first place. Luke dies and the end. Alright, where do I even start with this movie? To give this movie credit, the final fight with Luke was pretty fun to watch. Luke just straight up pulls an Obi-Wan here and trolls Kylo Ren. And some ideas used with Luke were actually pretty good. This film also looks amazing. They nailed the look of everything here. There's even a scene where Yoda appears and burns a Jedi temple, and although the scene did very little for the plot, it was still so good, man. They even used the puppet version of Yoda instead of CGI and it looks great. But the bad stuff just unfortunately outweighs all the good stuff in this movie. We aren't even gonna talk about how Rose and Finn were just wasted. Overall, The Last Jedi is a movie with confusing but promising ideas executed poorly. I am convinced that the only people who actually like this movie are those who've never seen any other Star Wars trilogy. F tier. Solo was a mid-movie. Honestly, I never really had high expectations from a standalone Solo film, but any film with Childish Gambino in it is instantly still good in my books. So this film takes place about 10 years before A New Hope, where we see a young Han Solo trying to make a name for himself as a pilot. But then he gets arrested by this guy called Beckett and gets sent to die in a Wookiee pit, where we also meet the one and only Chewbacca. And Han pretty much convinces Chewie to let him escape, leading to both of them joining Beckett back in their gang. And then together they rob a train, which fails, causing a bunch of people to die. So to avoid being killed by the boss guy, they do another score to settle their debt. This is when we meet Lando Calrissian, my beloved, and also the Millennium Falcon. And then they do this mission where they free a bunch of slaves to get the money back to repay the boss guy. But then Han Solo gets betrayed by Beckett. Who could have seen this coming?
You weren't paying attention. I told you don't trust anybody.
Anyways, in the end, Solo kills Beckett, and also we get this random-ass Darth Maul cameo because I guess they needed some fan service for this movie. Except this cameo literally leads to nowhere and wasn't even necessary at all. Also, Han wins the Millennium Falcon in a game of space poker. So yeah, Solo was definitely a fun but mediocre movie that I doubt I'll ever watch again. It's kind of a shame that this movie was the least performing Star Wars movie. I mean, it wasn't that great, but it wasn't as insulting and as in-your-face as The Last Jedi. This movie was honestly such a nice break from Jedis and Siths and over-the-top Force use. It was just a fun and clean heist movie. So for that, E tier. Well, we've made it. Through trial and tribulation, highs and lows, the saga will end. Yeah, you know what else should end? Your fucking bloodline. Man, if there's anything those sequel movies accomplish, it's definitely made me feel like I took the prequels for granted, because at least those movies had a planned storyline. This movie practically digs its own grave with the very first line in the opening title crawl. So remember how Palpatine literally gets thrown down the shaft of the Death Star and explodes? Well, I don't know how to tell you guys this.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
So this movie basically revolves around Rey, Poe, Finn, and Chewie trying to find Palpatine so they can kill him. They arrive on this desert planet where, through the use of the Force, Kylo Ren somehow snatches Rey's necklace, immediately finding out where she is.
That's not how the Force works.
But then Lando Calrissian appears out of nowhere and he's just helping the main crew now, I guess. But then Chewie gets captured by the Empire and Kylo Ren rolls up. Rey then does a backflip, causing Kylo Ren to die. But then he walks it off. And then Rey accidentally uses Force Lightning, killing Chewbacca. Yeah, I know, it's a lot to process. For some reason, this movie has the fastest pacing out of every Star Wars movie. I literally blink once and we went from Palpatine being back from the dead to Chewbacca dying. Oh, but never mind, because the next scene is Chewbacca and he's just alive. What is this? So the gang head back into Kylo Ren's ship to rescue Chewie. This is when Rey and Kylo Ren just sort of talk and also have a schizo duo through the Force. Say it again with me, people. That's not how the Force works. Kylo Ren eventually gets to his ship and reveals that Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter. And I get how they were trying to turn this scene into an iconic I am your father moment, but this twist really does not land at all. I mean, when everyone saw this scene, I don't think anyone was really all too surprised, me included. So then Rey escapes with the Falcon, traveling to the wreckage of the second Death Star, where she finds Kylo Ren. And the two of them ensue in what could possibly be considered the most poorly choreographed lightsaber fight in all of Star Wars.
Superhero landing!
Ben Kenobi versus Darth Vader clears this fight any day. But then Leia uses the Force to telepathically die, distracting Kylo Ren, leaving Rey open to stab him. But we learn that Rey just has the power to heal someone using the Force, and she heals Kylo Ren because why not, you know? I'm sorry, but these Disney sequels completely just ruined the whole point of the Force in Star Wars for me. I get that Rey is a Palpatine and all, but they still just made Rey so OP for basically no reason and with little to no character development. The scene following this is pretty good though. It's basically Han just coming in and convincing Kylo to turn to the light, and the dialogue is just great overall. But alas, this great scene is lost in the mess that is this movie. As we continue, Rey heads over to reunite with her grandfather as the rebels continue to make their last stand. Ben also arrives and is now a good guy, and with both of their combined lightsabers, Rey finally kills Palpatine. Or so I hope. There's literally no telling if he's gonna come back at this point. Lando also somehow gets like 1 billion rebel ships to join the war because plot, I guess. And through this, they win the war. Rey also dies, but then Ben sacrifices himself and Force heals her. Oh god, no, not again! Rip Ben, I guess. This dude was honestly the best character in the entire new trilogy. So yeah, not so happy ending, I guess. We also do not talk about this scene. So there we have it. The Rise of Skywalker was honestly a movie that felt very desperate to please everyone to the point where it became very unsatisfying to watch. The ending was undeserved, the plot was confused, not to mention Palpatine. Hey, I mean Palpatine was cool and all, Ian McDiarmid played his part, but he 100% should not have been in this movie. And while there are some good scenes, this is probably the worst possible outcome for how this trilogy could have ended. Comparing this movie to The Last Jedi, I think this is a bit worse. Therefore, get in the trash compactor. So after deliberately watching and suffering through 11 Star Wars movies, here is my final ranking. For best to worst, we have The Empire Strikes Back, the most iconic and greatest Star Wars movie ever made. A New Hope, the Star Wars movie that started it all that still holds up today. Revenge of the Sith, the most story-rich movie in all of the prequels. Return of the Jedi, a great movie bogged down by a boring first act. Rogue One, a tonally different Star Wars movie with a cool ending. Attack of the Clones, a movie with CGI and storytelling worse than I can remember. The Phantom Menace, a movie I only remember because of the cool lightsaber fight at the end. The Force Awakens, basically just A New Hope but worse. Solo, a nice and simple spin-off movie with an unnecessary cameo. The Last Jedi, a movie with great ideas weighed down by horrible writing choices. The Rise of Skywalker. Once again, get in the trash compactor. Star Wars to this day is one of the most influential franchises to ever exist. I mean, what once was a dream that came into George Lucas somehow spiraled into a sprawling empire with great movies and not to mention great merchandise sales. And even though Star Wars right now is most likely deader than ever, nobody will ever forget the immense hope that these movies brought to multiple generations. Whether you grew up in the 80s and were able to experience the original trilogy by Lucas firsthand, or you grew up in the 2000s and got to watch the story of Anakin unfold with the prequels, or even if you grew up in the 2010s and you got to watch the Disney sequels finally end off the saga. I truly believe that there is something for everyone in all of these Star Wars movies. These films define childhoods, it defined memories, and even generations. So no matter if the prequels were worse than I remember, or if the sequels were ruined by a lack of planning and conflicting ideas by two directors, or even if somehow Palpatine will return, I will still love Star Wars, and I will always remember it as the franchise that captivated so many people that took place in a galaxy far, far away.
This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the Dark Times.
How did my father die?
A young Jedi named Darth Vader, who was a pupil of mine, turned to evil. He betrayed and murdered.
You were the chosen one!
Now the Jedi are all but extinct. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
The Force?
And the Force is what gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
Oh god, no!